ready?
We should be set.
Okie dokie. Go for it, Kaya.
My Zoom has been having issues. It like wouldn't quit on me yesterday for some reason. I had to shut down my whole computer. All right, I call to order this August 13th, 2020 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission. First agenda item, I guess after call to order, citizens to be heard. Do we have any citizens to be heard? I'm taking that as a no. Great. Discussion on it. I actually have sort of a point of order discussion item as chair. I wanted to bring up, I'm wondering if now is a good time or if that should happen at the end of the meeting under future agenda items. Oh, I can't hear you, Nora.
Now is probably fine.
Okay, great. I did just want to bring up, it's great to see everyone who's here in attendance tonight. That's fantastic. Thank you all. I know you've been consistent folks attending every meeting, but I had a discussion with the mayor this week about attendance at planning commission meetings, just in general, not just during COVID, where we all need to make sure that we're constantly aware of the fact that if you miss more than 3 meetings, you are subject to being removed from planning commission. That's in our bylaws. That is something that we do need to start holding people to. There are definitely other people who would like to be on planning commission. If you're not interested or unable to attend, that's not to say that things don't come up, but I think a really good way that we could continue to hold ourselves accountable for attendance would be to, if you are going to not be in attendance at a meeting, you need to let Nora and myself know via email, probably at least when we get our agenda or as soon as you know, certainly before the meeting. There's just too many times when we've been nervous about having a quorum at the actual start time of the meeting, which shouldn't be happening. We should know who's going to be there and who's not. Things come up, obviously, but if you have any advance notice of your absence, you need to be letting people know. The assumption should be that you will be there unless you let us know otherwise. And that should go to Nora. Primarily, it would be great if you CC'd me as well, just as chair, so I can know. Just want to make sure that that was kind of something we were discussing. We hadn't brought it up in a long time. Coronavirus has been very weird. This is not going to apply retroactively. Quite honestly, most planning commissioners have missed more than 3 meetings. So if we were going strictly by the bylaws, we would all be subject to that. But starting now, the expectation is that, you know, you have 3 absences, barring some sort of emergency or leave or other things that you can talk about. But just to make sure that that's the expectation as you're planning campouts, as you're planning work, make sure you're planning around planning commission, which is the same schedule every month. So it should be easy to do. Does anyone have any questions about that? That was just something that the mayor wanted me to bring up at this meeting, and to make sure you all knew, if we are tracking attendance, and if you miss 3 meetings, you will get an email from the mayor saying, hey, you've missed 3 meetings. The next one means, I'll be asking you to step down from planning commission.
So I have had a number of discussions with the mayor as well. And in fact, a few meetings ago, I gave you all copies of the bylaws to remind you that that is the attendance requirement. And yeah, if you can't be there for some reason, you need to let us know for sure. The mayor gets the quarterly report. So at the end of each quarter, she gets a report stating who, it's just little check marks, like who was there for which meeting. And that's the basis upon which you get paid, but also just shows the attendance. So she does that every month and we'll be reviewing it. I tried to get a hold of Brian again. He is technologically, what's the right word? Disadvantaged, I suppose.
Challenged.
And we don't want to discriminate against him because he is older and not as technologically savvy as some other people. So I told him that I really want him to start joining these calls again, and that we would be happy, he could come to City Hall and he could watch it with Corey or whatever. And I still haven't heard back from him. So I don't quite know what to do about that. He may be out of town. I don't know. But I will, and I sent it to his home email. So we'll just have to play that one by ear, just a FYI, Kaya. That's all.
Great. Thanks, Nora. And I think it's the professional aspect of it is just make an effort. If you're unable, if you're having technological difficulties, if you're going to be somewhere, you shouldn't be missing months of meetings without a word to the city staff. That just shouldn't be something that happens. And it seems like everyone here understands that. I just want to make sure that was like super clear, was said, it's in our record. We can all do that. So yeah, thank you all with that in mind for attending. We appreciate it.
Are you talking about 3 meetings a quarter or 3 throughout the whole year? Just clarify.
3 throughout the whole year. So yeah.
Or more than one a quarter. Or
right.
more than
okay.
one a quarter.
Yeah.
And if, if you have a planned vacation that you've had planned forever or whatever, or if you have a medical issue or you're sick, those things are probably fine if they're occasional, but it needs to be consistent attendance, which all of you guys are doing well at.
Yeah, I think it's more about we shouldn't be starting a meeting wondering who's going to be there is really the big thing that then inconveniences, city staff who are already working past their work day. And we want to make sure that we're being considerate of that. If you're going to miss a meeting, just make sure someone knows. But I want to avoid this year any more times when we go, oh, I don't know where so-and-so is. Are they going to be here? That just shouldn't be happening. This is our responsibility. So awesome. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. Let's see, first discussion item, which is our only agenda item tonight, presentation and discussion on the Lions Back Resort.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see that?
Yes, looks good.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, Lions Back Resort. I gave this presentation to the City Council on Tuesday. So in this PowerPoint I put together for them, but I'm going to cover the same thing. So I'm going to use it for you guys too. So this is intended to be a really high level overview of the Lions Back project. So you know what it is, what was proposed, a little bit about the background, a little bit about the history. It's been around for a long time and it's pretty complicated because there have been 2 lawsuits and there have been actions. One of them, we took an action as a city and got sued and lost. So basically we are where we are is there was an approval in 2008 and 2009, an annexation and approval, and that's what's valid currently. So the location is Sand Flats Road. I'll show you a map in a little bit. And the property owner is Sitla, and they have entered into an agreement with the Moab Land Company, LLC, which I'm going to call LB Moab, or the developer, to be their development arm. So that's who we're working with now is LB Moab Land Company. The parcel is about 175 acres. The proposal itself is 73% open space. It's 70. Commercial footprint is about 54,000 square feet. The residential footprint is about 365,000 square feet. I'll get into the details in a minute. And what was proposed in 2008, 2009 is a hotel, casitas, which is that's their unit type. And there are different sizes of casitas. and then 18 employee housing units, which would come at a later phase. Some of the commercial things that they're talking about are what's proposed is a car wash repair maintenance facility, maybe some storage units, some gazebos and picnic areas, a bunch of recreation facilities, and things, other kinds of things that would support sort of a standalone resort. So a little bit about the background. In the early 2000s, as I mentioned, Sitla entered into an agreement with LB Moab. And it was at that time, the property was outside the city limits. So it was in the county. Prior to 2008, the city, when they approached us to start discussing annexation, we didn't really have a zone that fit their intended sort of standalone resort development. And so the city created the SAR zone, which is Sensitive Area Resort Zone. And that specifically was created for this kind of development. And that's the zoning that was assigned to it was when the property was annexed. And the SAR zone requires that they go through the master plan development process. And the code talks about what that process is like. It includes preliminary and final plat. So then in 2007, 2008, LB Moab removed some campground facilities and some trash and some hazardous things just to clean up the site because there were some issues with that campground there. And then after many meetings and lots of discussion between both the Planning Commission and the City Council, the pre-annexation agreement was approved and recorded. And that is one of the guiding documents for Lions Back. Then in late 2008 and early 2009, the Planning Commission reviewed and approved the preliminary master plan development, which was approved by both Planning Commission and City Council. So in late 2008, the annexation petition was approved. And then in September 2009, there was review and approval of the development and phasing agreement. So that's the second of the two governing documents. Well, there are actually three. There's the pre-annexation agreement, there's the development and phasing agreement, and then there's the master plan development that was approved. So after preliminary MPD and annexation were approved, the city and a lawsuit was filed against the city and the developer and Sitla. And that lasted a while, but it was ultimately dismissed in favor of the city and Sitla. So the courts found that the decision was valid and correct and had good standing, and so the project could move forward. Well, by the time that all happened, the market, as you'll probably remember, radically changed. And so the developers decided that the economy took a big downturn. And then in a few years, the developers decided that based upon market conditions, they wanted to modify their master plan development. And the only change really that they talked about at that time was changing from a hotel, which was 50 kind of low 1 to 2 story, 3-bedroom hotel suites, if you will, some connected in various buildings, to a 150-room hotel. So the room count would be the same, but it changed some of the layout and the configuration where the recreation facilities went and all those kinds of things. So after a lot of discussion in 2015, 2016, the city made a determination that we considered that a minor modification of the approved master plan development or the preliminary master plan development. So that was approved administratively by the city staff. Then we got sued again And this time, and it's been several years, like 3 or 4, the judge determined that Moab City incorrectly approved this as a minor modification, and that it should have gone through some public process. But and in addition, that the 2008-2009 agreements and documents represent the approved project as it sits today. So the stuff that was done in 16, 15, 16, 17, that all got thrown out by the court because they said it was illegal. And so here we are in 2020 back looking at the 2008 and 2009 approval. So just in the past few months, LB Moab has reached out to the city offices. We've had several kind of big picture discussions about moving forward from here. There's been a lot of discussion about the project utilities, which are going in the water and sewer right now is under construction. And we have begun talking to them as a planning department a little bit about where they want to go from here. So this is the location map. And so you can kind of see Sand Flats Road right along here. There's a big turn. And so this is the property. In this area is where Lion's Back and other fins are. So this is right up against the rocks there where everybody hikes up and takes their dogs, at least I do. And this is the curve in the road. You can see that's there, and many people park. Some people park there and then just take, and there's not like one path, but there's a whole bunch of them up there. And that's all private property. It's all owned by Lion's Back. And then in the foreground is variable topography, generally relatively flat, except for, there's some pits and burrows and things like that. So they own that 175 acres. And then the adjacent zoning is RA1 over here, which is 1 acre minimum. These parcels have not yet been annexed into the city. So the approved residential densities from the 2008-2009 agreements include 257 residential units, including 50 hotel suites, which are anticipated to be 3-bedroom again, 30 one-story casitas, 32 stories casitas that are of the smaller size, 1,300 to 1,500 square feet, and then 41 storage village casitas and 2-story village casitas that are a little bit bigger, 1,800 to 2,100 square feet, 21 story and 14 2-story hillside casitas. These are like the expensive ones because they have views, 2,500 to 3,000 square feet, so they're a little bit bigger. And then, as I mentioned, 18 employee housing units that are required to be built in a later phase. The maximum number of units that could be allowed with the SAR zone, just based on raw numbers, is around 400 units. So no applications have been filed yet. Discussions are starting to occur about how to move forward. And what we've been doing is I've been working with Chris McEnany, who used to be our contract city attorney. And he's been involved in this from the beginning. So I've been working with him to try to gain an understanding of all of the approval documents. I also have some documents from some of the court proceedings, some of the exhibits, to try to paint a full picture of what's gone on. So the next step in this recording, we have this development and phasing agreement and the pre-annexation agreement, both of them together, list certain phases, and there are certain improvements that have to be reviewed and approved with each phase. And the preliminary MPD has been approved. And what they need to do now is come in for plats, for final plats for each of those phases. And the phasing plan says, for example, in phase one, that they'll build the infrastructure that comes off Sand Flats Road, that they'll straighten out that little curve, or a little curve on Sand Flats Road. So that's, and some other things that go along with the first phase, including a percentage of the open space that's required based upon the number of units. So that's what they will come in with. What's happening right now is the sewer and water for the entire project. And the way the annexation agreement works and what's happening is that they are required to build that to city standards. After a lot of discussion, they agreed, and it's being inspected by our engineering inspector. So he's up there pretty much every day checking to make sure it's done to city standards. When that's all done, the kind of backbone of the utility system, then they will ask for the city to review, and the developers will then give those systems over to the city. So ultimately, it was and it has been and is anticipated that the sewer and the water would be part of our sewer and water systems with the city. Right or wrong, that's what the approval says. Project-wise utilities. And with each final plat, we have to do separate subdivision improvement agreements, which basically says, with this first phase, these are all the other things I have to do, like the interior roads and the laterals and interior water lines and grading and all those things. And then a financial guarantee for each phase of the improvement. So those things are required for each phase. There is language in the agreement about bonding for water and sewer for utilities. And usually what happens in developments is if they want to record a plat before the sewer and water is completely done, then they would have to post a bond with the city. But since they have not yet had a final plat approved, there's no bonding requirement. There is language in the agreements to say that we could require them to post a bond, but it's not been our practice, again, right or wrong, to ask them to post a bond before that first plat comes through. So those utilities are what you see under construction up there, and we are inspecting them every day. Oh, that's not the right slide. Okay, so in conclusion, and I'll show you another set of plans in a minute, but in conclusion, the Lions Back Resort has been approved and is vested in the pre-annexation agreement, the development and phasing agreement, and the preliminary MPD. Now, I could send you both the pre-annexation agreement and the development phasing agreement if you wish. It's good reading material if you have insomnia. Actually, it's pretty interesting, but it's really complicated. And then the Lions Back Resort is already part of the city and is already zoned SAR. And the MPD and annex and agreements are consistent with that zone. The developer and city are discussing how to move forward once they apply for the first final plat. And we have not received an application yet, so we're not actively reviewing anything. And all of the work that is being done now and the work that will be done in the future has to meet an approved drinking water source protection plan that was approved after the initial approval. I think it was 2010. The state and the city and the developers all agreed upon the conditions by which this development can move forward and meet our drinking water protection requirements. And I mention that because there's a couple people out there in the public who are particularly concerned and are really bird dogging this and watching it, which is good because it's important to make sure that we move forward according to those things. So that's the slide presentation. Let me show you one more exhibit, if I can find it. There we go. So this is many of the exhibits, well, a couple of the exhibits I sent you are really big files. And that's because I got them from either the developer or Chris McEnany. And in many cases, the PDFs are illegible. So I had to go back to these sort of original digital files, and they're huge. And someday I'll figure out how to make them smaller and still be usable. So this takes a while to load. This is the general layout. So this is the corner on Sand Flats Road, where people park and go hike up along the fence back here. This is the area down here, this is light green, is the area where the Mill Creek Overlook Trail starts, and that will be maintained as a public access easement. We have been talking to them about the possibility of some trails in through here, although it was not part of the approval. But they are looking at trying to be responsive to community concerns that they've heard. And they've reached out to a number of different community groups, and they're starting to talk to folks about this because they don't want it to be super adversarial. They understand that it will be controversial and people won't like it, but they want to do what they can to try to make it a good project and try to accommodate people's needs and desires as much as they can. So obviously these units are hillside units, and those are going to be the more expensive ones. And then, some of the other units, these are also in various phases, but I think these are the smallest units. And then there are these yellow ones are a little bit bigger. This was the original hotel layout, and it included a whole bunch of parking and then another entrance onto Sand Flats Road. This originally was all in the first phase. And these condominium units down here, there are, I think this loop, there are about 42 of them. So what they want to do to move forward is not deal with the hotel at all. That will become a later phase. It might even be phase 6, because for a while probably nobody's going to loan them any money to build a hotel. And at some point they may want to come in with a modification of the MPD to modify that, but we're not talking about that right now. They're going to not do this, which they have the right to do under the amendments. They have a right to change their phasing. So the first phase will include these first casita units and the associated infrastructure. These are the employee housing units. So a little bit further down, this is where the cell tower is up on the ridge. So these are where the employee housing units are proposed to be. And again, it's in a later phase. These are some storage units that they talked about, and maybe a car, truck, service station, filling station situation. And then there are various other tennis, platform tennis, volleyball, putting greens, golf, driving range, lawn games, soccer, playground equipment. All of that stuff is around the kind of hotel core. And so many of those things are not being constructed right up front, but we will be talking to them about moving forward with some of the tennis courts and those kinds of things that are kind of intermeshed among the casita units. So when they come forward, those are built concurrently. And again, the phasing agreement talks about some of that. I'm going to apologize for the next few slides. I didn't create this file, and whoever did decided to put all the rest of the pages upside down. So this is their open space plan, which shows basically 3 types of open space. This dark green stuff is natural open space, so will be largely undisturbed. This is interior open space, which will be more passive areas in between the condo units. And then active recreation is in this darker blue color. And the way they envision it is that each of these casitas would actually have their own lot. So they would be a freestanding house on a lot that would be sold to property owners. Property owners could choose to put it in a rental pool or not. It would be their choice. Nightly rentals are allowed in this whole project. This shows a little bit more about, oh, this is the phasing plan. And this is, of course, upside down. So this whole phase right here was the first phase. So now they're just doing this part of it. We think, although we haven't got an application yet. And then as I said, they plan to divide them into lots. The approval included preliminary utility plans, preliminary road plans, road cross sections, some pretty detailed information as to the public improvements. And those are all attached as attachments to the agreements and are still in place and effective. So all of these documents are part of the approval that show just additional detailed cross sections of roads, engineering documents. So those are all part of the original approval and are therefore pretty much vested under the project approval and the documents of entitlement. So that's basically my presentation. And I am here to answer whatever questions I can. We have been talking internally about this. Come on. We've been talking internally about this for quite some time, several months, and we had a conversation with the developers last week. There we go. Where we talked about the fact that although this may not technically have to have another public hearing process, that certainly the plats will need to go before the Planning Commission and City Council. But while a public hearing is not required, we are recommending that we do a kind of a second step, a final MPD plan approval that we would take public input at, probably at the City Council level, but the Planning Commission would make a recommendation to the City Council and they would probably have a public hearing on it. We've also talked, I know that the developers out there talking to community groups, as I said, we may do the same. We may, once an application is filed, decide on social media ways to kind of get the word out on all this. But we wanted you to have the basic information before you started hearing from all your friends and stuff. I'm sure you already have, because it's already all over social media. But that's the situation. Questions, comments?
It's big.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's massive. That's ridiculous.
It could be a lot bigger, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
And at the time, probably this was 2008, 2009, when the economy was tanking, and I think many communities approved things in that time frame that maybe they look back on and say, maybe we shouldn't have been so anxious.
Yeah.
But that was the time. And, I've worked other places that approved things during that time period that, if we wish we had to do it over again, we might do it a little bit differently, but it is what it is. Although I'm not supposed to say that for whatever reason, but.
It is.
So it seems like a sensitive area seems like a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, having facilities like a filling station seems really inappropriate for something that would be a sensitive area.
Sensitive area, but it's a sensitive area resort zone, and those things are all allowed uses. So you're right. I mean, maybe we should have called the zoning something else, but we didn't. And it allows for those kinds of resort facilities, ancillary resort facilities. What it requires is for there to be at least 70% open space, which is more than anywhere else, and requires them to have trails, and they have agreed to allow an easement for Hell's Revenge. And then, as I've mentioned, they do have a preliminary trails plan that's really hard to read and kind of hard to define. And they are looking at refining that and try to address some things they've been hearing. So hopefully that will result in even more trails than were originally approved.
On Exhibit 1, it shows areas marked as future annexation to the, I believe it would be the south and to the west. So are those future annexation areas being counted as the current percentage of open space?
No. No, there is, so what it talks about in the agreements is that there is this additional property. I don't know where it is. But there's additional property, but that this development does not include that at this time. So as you know, we look at the open space plan. These are the areas that, and what's likely is that they will dedicate those. They either have to dedicate them to a homeowners association or other entity. And the restrictions on development would be applied at the time that that's platted, and they'll probably come in with big chunks of it. We tried to encourage them to kind of front load the open space. So with the first phase, to maybe all of the stuff on this side of the road gets dedicated as open space. So we're trying to get them to really front load some of those open space amenities.
Are there plans for the road, or are those not specific to this development?
Sand Flats?
Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things that the developers have to do is improve Sand Flats, but only as far as increasing shoulders, like 7 feet on one side and 4 on the other, to provide some better shoulders. And then they have to do something on one of the curves that has turning radius issues right now. I guess people with trailers and stuff like that have trouble with it. So that curve has to be smoothed out. And that will be done consistent with their concurrent with the first phase. Other than that, there are really no improvements that are required or are proposed as part of Sand Flats Road. Mill Creek Road is also of concern, and we talked about that with the city council at some length. That intersection, you know, that whole section between Milts and Sand Flats Road is kind of never land right now. It's getting a ton of traffic, and people, so we've been contacted by several people along that stretch that say R2 doesn't really make sense here anymore, and maybe we should be looking at a different kind of use. And that's something we'll probably be talking about in the future. Another planning effort that's going on that I have probably mentioned, but may not be on your radar, is we are working with UDOT to do Grand County and part of San Juan County and San Juan County to do a regional transportation plan. And the importance of that is that regional transportation plans are adopted by all of the entities that are involved, and also by UDOT. And then that allows UDOT and the city to ask for money for certain improvements if they were identified in that regional transportation plan. I think it's reasonable to expect that the whole Mill Creek, perhaps Sand Flats area, will be an area that will probably be slated for future capital improvements and be able to get funds for that someday in the future. Right now, we have no money to do anything.
That's separate than the hotspot funding that they're still trying to figure out.
It is separate, yes.
Okay.
And the kinds of improvements we're talking about to Mill Creek and this would not qualify at all for the hotspot funding. And at your next meeting, I will probably talk about the hotspot funding because we're going to try to get some ideas out there about that and do some public engagement. So it's likely that'll be on your next agenda or the one after that.
What are the impact fees like on a project like this? Like I know it was 2008, different economy, such and such, but are they significant? Like they have to fix the roads, they have to work on them. But what else?
All of the private roads will be, all of the interior roads will be private. It's just sand flats that will remain public. So all these roads will be private. So impact fees, I believe, and I have to go back and double check, but I believe that as each of these lots develop, they would be charged whatever impact fees we charge today for single family residences.
And that's concurrent. That's like now it's not like a agreed upon before that's already over. As they go through each phase, when they develop, that's when.
I don't know. I think they'll have to pay the appropriate impact fees. In fact, yeah, that's the way the agreements work. They had talked about doing, asking the county to approve like a special improvement district to cover the water and sewer and everything. But what happens with those is they often get abandoned, and then we end up picking up the slack, and we have sewer and water that's not up to city standards. So we opted away from allowing them to create a special service district. And that's why we have accepted the water and sewer if it's built to city standards, today's city standards, which it is being built to.
Or when these lots are sold, is the title, is it going to be sold outright to the purchaser, or does Sitla doing a like 99-year lease? Because aren't some of the other Sitla lands only a leasing agreement?
Some of them are, but in this case, I believe that once they're platted, they can actually sell those lots to individuals. Sitla will have to sign all of the final plats, and because they are the property owner, and then eventually it will all be owned by either the homeowners association. Some of the open space may be controlled by other entities, and all of the lots and interior roads will be privately owned and maintained.
Who is Lionsback Moab?
Let me see. Mike Badger originally, and then the person I'm dealing with now is a gentleman named John Dwight, who I think is his stepson. And he's very friendly to work with, and he really wants to move this forward. There's no doubt about that. And Sitla wants to move it forward because they want the money. But they are willing to have conversations like about additional public process, even though we may not need it, that we should do it, just err on the side of more rather than less and get sued again. What we really want to do is try to figure out how we can move this forward without getting sued again, because that takes a lot of time and money for everybody. And then it will end up back in 2008. I think, again, with the 2008 plan, I think that we're anticipating that probably no matter what action gets taken on the first plat, it'll probably get challenged in court. We don't know for sure, but there's certainly lots of rumblings out there.
I know anything that you can do, I mean, absent putting a giant resort on top of our single source aquifer at Skeckle Springs, which this is, probably would go a long way. I know that's,
Yeah.
that's what I've heard. That's what I've heard in the community and from people who know a heck of a lot about the water we have and the water we don't have. That location over our aquifer, over pretty porous rock is a concern. So
Right. So a couple things related to that. One, that big deal when this was originally approved. And this area is, everyone agreed that this area fell into what's called a zone 2, which means there are special restrictions that are applied. In other words, there's an awareness that there's an issue with potential groundwater contamination. And so that's why there was a drinking water source protection plan that was developed and approved by the state and us and SITLA. And so that remains in place. They're going through, and right now the state is going through and relooking at all of those source water zones. And it appears as though the size of it up here may actually shrink, but that doesn't matter because they are committed to go the extra mile. And whether they're in zone 2 or not, that's what they're going to build the standards to, which are more restrictive than it may end up being if they remap it. But it's definitely a concern.
cool. Thanks for explaining the history of that and laying that out for everybody. Nora, we appreciate it. Do we have any? Oh, sorry.
Probably mean sitting through some hours of public meetings. But we wanted you to kind of understand the basics, as I'm sure you are probably having discussions with people in the community about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be nice to have this available for folks to watch on YouTube too.
Yep.
Great. Cool. If you're all finished, we can wrap up that agenda item. Move on to number 4, any future agenda items.
Golly. Well, as I mentioned, we're going to probably come to you. We have this hotspot committee, which is UDOT has graciously granted us time to redefine our project for the hotspot funding. And that's what was when we were talking about the parking garage. That was that funding. And we've told them that we're not going to do the parking garage, and they've given us time to look at an alternative project or an alternative package of project. So there's a committee that has been meeting, and it's on YouTube if you want to watch it, and their agendas on the city website. And they meet, it depends, every 2 weeks, once a month, to discuss what projects we want to put forward. They have to be congestion management related and have to be safety related. They can't necessarily go for long-term expenses for a shuttle. It could go for some overhead expenses if we can show them that we have ongoing income to pay, to continue to pay for operation of a shuttle. Otherwise, that's not part of the funding that they anticipate at this time. However, there are some communities that are coming up with sort of low, kind of smaller shuttle kinds of systems that are much less expensive to run. And, you know, we certainly all have that in the back of our mind for the future. What's being looked at now is some enhancement to the streetscapes and off-street parking on First North, First South, and Center Street. Not horribly dissimilar to the parking along where City Hall is, where you've got the center median. And it's, you know, it's called Complete Streets for those of us planning gurus out there. And it's very common, and there are lots of different ways we can do it. But what it does is try to create additional parking spaces while also creating some green areas, and make the streetscape better so people will feel more comfortable. So that's the goals, to really do that and increase the number of parking spaces. We've also been talking about trying to do some bulb out types of improvements on Main Street. Main Street improvements are tricky because it's a state road. We don't have a lot of control over it, but we think that will be open to bulb outs, which means that basically it in effect decreases the pavement width you have to cross from one side of the street to the other. So it kind of brings the sidewalk into these little round things. There are a couple of them already on Main Street, but so we may want to do a couple of those with UDOT's blessing. The other thing that we're talking about for funding is the potential of a multi-purpose trail that goes south of town into the Spanish Valley, because people ride their bike along the highway right now, and it would just be really nice to have, especially with the affordable housing that's going in south of town, to have a multi-use pathway. So those are kind of the three big projects that we're looking at as a package, and refining those. We're moving forward to refine those a little bit, just so you know. What else we got, Corey? Next week, we're going to have a couple of minor subdivisions.
Two.
Right? Two minor subdivisions. We're also going to be considering an extension for the Abbey subdivision preliminary plat. Abbey subdivision was approved a year ago, August 22nd. And I just received a letter asking for a 1-year extension, which is permitted under the code. And that just means that they get an extra year before they have to go to the final plat and actually plat it, pay for bond for the improvements. And I think the reason is probably pretty obvious. The whole world is upside down, and I think all the developers and all of us are rethinking our finances. So I think, everything got put on hold for a while, and they're just kind of trying to start to work on that again. We have been having discussions with them about some of the concerns that the Planning Commission raised a year ago, and they are addressing those. But they'll be asking just for a 1-year extension. What else, Corey?
I think that pretty much covers it for now.
All right.
At some point, we'll also be giving you a presentation on Walnut Lane and what's been going on with Walnut Lane, which is the trailer park the city bought, and how we are trying to move forward with that. It's a really tough project. And Caitlin is doing an amazing job trying to corral everyone to move that forward.
I know she is. Yes, we all appreciate
Yeah,
that.
she
Recognize
is.
that for sure.
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
So we'll be giving an update on that. And then in addition, the Moab Area Housing Task Force is preparing a presentation to give to both planning commissions and city councils, city and county council, and then both planning commissions, not necessarily at the same time, but just on the status of our affordable housing goals and moving forward with those and where we are. We've made good progress on many of them, and there are other things that we need to kind of shift our thinking on a little bit. And so we'll be giving you a presentation about that, probably in early September.
So I have a question. I had heard whisperings about maybe expanding outdoor seating in some areas. Is that something as a planning commission that we could encourage the city to get done?
Of course. Let me tell you what's going on with that. Thanks for bringing it up. So the city council has authorized us to move forward and allow restaurants to use some of the city right of way for outdoor dining in this time of COVID. So what's happening is there's an emergency proclamation that's been prepared by our city attorney. She just finished that end of last week, that Joel is responsible to sign because of our form of government. Our city manager signs that. That would allow us to create these temporary outdoor dining spaces and not change our land use code. In other words, it's not really a land use decision, so we're not changing our code, but we're allowing it due to COVID and to allow the economic health of these businesses to be able to expand their distanced COVID-19 seating. So what I'm doing right now is working on documents to make that happen, like an application form. There will be sort of some rules and restrictions and design standards, but we're moving forward with that as quickly as we can. And I've been contacted by a couple of folks already. So I think we would probably expect to see those pop up around town. It's an administrative process. We're going to do it much like business licenses. So somebody just applies and there are checkoffs with various departments. They have to meet the guidelines. They have to sign some liability things, of course. And we are not, as a city, getting involved in alcohol licenses, but if an individual business decides they want to ask the state to expand their alcohol permits, and they can do that. It's not part of our process, but they'd have to go through a separate one. I think some of them are intending to. The spaces will have to be defined by some kind of a barrier that would also act as some safety measures. And we'll require that to have COVID-19 health requirements there on the site. All of the only way you can get into the seating areas would be from the sidewalk. You have to maintain the sidewalk width, and you have to maintain 2 driving lanes that are basically 12 feet wide. So there's a certain minimum that we need to continue vehicles going down there, but we're willing to let people look at using some of the property. There are also some folks who have parking areas that are privately owned. And if they can I've told people if they can get the approval of whoever owns the parking, we will approve it on those private spaces as well. The expiration date would be November 30th. We anticipate that mostly it will be to hit the kind of fall, Labor Day through October, our next sort of big season. So we're trying to accommodate that. Main Street is a different animal because UDOT owns all that right of way, and then they do not intend to approve encroachment into their street. So Main Street businesses, if that's their only frontage, they won't be able to apply for these. But if they're on an alley or there's a parcel in between where they could do something to the side or to the rear, those would likely be privately owned. And if the property owners approve, we would consider that as well.
Does that exist anywhere? I can't think of a single restaurant.
Yeah, there's a little space just by the Doughbird that they actually already put a few tables out there so they could kind of improve that more. Behind a bunch of those businesses in that block, there's a real mess of parking and access ways that are owned by all kinds of different people. And if those folks were all to get together and say, we want to maintain these areas as access points, but it's okay to allow expansion into these other areas, then that might work out. There's some other restaurants that have frontage both on side streets as well as Main Street. So those would be allowed to too. And other places in town, these would be allowed. So, if there's an eating establishment that's not on Main Street or not on First Center or Second, we would consider those as well, as long as they can meet the criteria.
I think what Telluride did is they didn't Telluride put a big table down one of their streets, and then everybody's just ordering online and the restaurants are delivering to that main table.
I don't know. Functionally,
Telluride has half of their main street blocked off and they have one-way directional traffic, and then most of the businesses have their own table sort of section in front of the business, at least when I was there last about a month ago, and it was really nice. It as a visitor, I felt very comfortable there before things had kind of sorted themselves out with masks and everything in town. It was really nice to be able to sort of interact and be out in public, but feel like you kind of had that opportunity to be outdoor and be distanced. It was really nice.
And
Yeah, in Telluride, it varies depending on what side of the street the business is on. If it's on the side of the street where there is traffic flow, they have it delineated and it's for that business. If it's on the other side of the street where they diverted that traffic, the city has put out little placards and it has a number on the table. So you order the takeout to that table number.
yeah, there are lots of different ways to do it. Telluride Park City has been allowing these kinds of outdoor dining. They kind of build platforms there into the parking in the seasonally for a number of years. And this year they expanded it further, and they actually closed Main Street down on Sundays, and a bunch of other businesses add tables in Main Street. And again, that's COVID related. But even without COVID, they allow it every year, which is something that we could too. I mean, we could decide that this is really cool and it's working well. It's not a traffic safety hazard, and we may want to amend our code to allow it in the future. We don't want to have, we want to make sure that parking is still available for the other businesses. So we don't want like all the parking in one whole area to be blocked off because there are businesses that are above or around the corner that often use that parking. So we don't want to leave any business high and dry in terms of not having any parking. But I think there's lots of wiggle room to provide some fun opportunities.
All right. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad the city's going to be allowing that. Sounds really good. Okay, if that's it for the evening, thank you everyone again for coming, and really appreciate your continued attendance in these continuing weird times. So thank you, Nora. Thank you, Summer. Thank you, Corey.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, have a great couple weeks.
Yeah, someday we may see each other in person. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to plug the Thursday market. This is shameless.
Oh, yeah.
Every other Thursday, not this Thursday, so not tonight, but next week, there's a market on Center where they close a section of Center Street down. It's growing, but they have quite a few produce. They have a great Navajo artist. I actually bought a little pendant that's from Gallup that's quite reasonably priced. And he promises he'll be back next week, and I promised to buy another pendant. So anyway,
I don't know if you can endorse a specific product at our public meeting here, so.
But there are various artists there, and produce and flowers and stuff like that. So it's cool. Check it out. It's mass.
Yeah,
everybody.
Great. It seems awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone. Adjourn this meeting at 7:05 p.m.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good night.
Thanks. Good night.